Hi everyone, today we'll be looking at 7 common mistakes contract manufacturers make during the NPI process. I'm Orkun, and this is our Vice President Chris. Hi Chris, how are you today?
Hey everybody, I'm great, thank you.
First, contract manufacturer does not understand your target market. Chris, in terms of why a contract manufacturer should understand the customer's target market, what would you say?
Well, every product that we make and every product that a CM makes obviously is going to go into an end user's hands. There's something they're going to use that product for. And it's very important that when you're producing any type of a product for whatever industry it's in, that it be customized really for that user, at the end user. And so whether it's a consumer electronics device, whether it's an industrial IoT device, whatever that end industry makes, there's things like durability, there's material quality, there's many different aspects of the product itself that you need to understand to make it well, so that when it goes to that final end user, it really meets the expectation that they have on that product.
Second most common mistake that contract manufacturers do is not accounting for flexibility and product pivots. Hardware startups start off with a napkin idea, and until they reach production stage, there will be many changes to their product. So a contract manufacturer should be flexible and account for these pivots as well. Chris, of all the companies that we worked with, have there been extreme changes from the idea stage when we onboard a customer versus what we have produced for them at the end?
It's funny you'd ask if there's been one. I would actually say that's the more common scenario versus the uncommon scenario. And the reason why actually is when a prototype is in its initial stages all the way through to its pilot, all the way through, there's changes and things that have to be done. And many times the very early prototyping stages, there's a lot of learning going on. And then at the same time, you've got your marketing team understanding your end customer. You have maybe changes to the component markets. There's all types of things that can happen in the early stage of hardware development. And so CMs generally like consistency. They like things to be very, very even. They want things to not change a whole lot. And if they do change, there's very rigid processes that are required to go through change management. And so that's really not very good if you're trying to develop a new piece of hardware, right? Where if things change, you need to be able to pivot. You need to be able to make those adjustments quickly, because every day that you don't have your product on the market is cash burn. Every day you don't have the product in the market is really an opportunity to miss some of your market. And so it really is incumbent upon those that are making the products for the customers to be able to change with those customers. I mean, obviously there's limits and there's things that you have to be able to set in stone as early as possible. But I think being flexible is very important for a CM when they're working with especially early stage startups.
Okay, coming to number 3, having inexperienced engineers and not doing a throughout DFM. For those who don't know what DFM is, DFM stands for Design for Manufacturing. Chris, how would you explain DFM?
Sure. Well, so DFM, as you said, Design for Manufacturing, is it's a process. There's really a set of steps that you have to go through to take a product from something that looks really nice, is what we call the looks like works like type of an environment where, yeah, it might have worked if you're doing 3D printing. It may have worked if you did CNC. It may have worked if you did very low volume electronics. But what ends up happening when you need to scale? So early stage, if you want prototypes 100, 200, 500, there's a lot of technologies that can be used to make that happen. But if you really want to scale and really get the economies that come from having high scale manufacturing, there's certain types of tooling that you need to use. There's certain types of processes that need to be used that need to scale. And so that's where Design for Manufacturing comes in, where you need to look at the overall design of a product, the packaging, the housings, the electronics, the parts, all the different aspects of this that you say, okay, how can I make this as easy to manufacture as possible, but at the same time keep the product with the same look and feel, keep the product acting and really working for the end user the same way it would have worked if it was using those other types of processes that may be more additive or slower. So that's really what DFM is about, is bridging that works like environment where maybe you had a prototype that cost $200 to create, and you're trying to get that down to $20 or $30. Going through that whole process to understand, how do I make this manufacturable? How do I put this in really large scale factories where I can have 100 people putting together 2,000 or 3,000 of a product every day? So that's really what it is, the process.
In terms of DFM, do you think DFM is something a contract manufacturer should do when they first begin a project, or is it a continuous process?
Oh, it's most certainly a continuous process. And it goes back to our first point, which was, understanding the end user, and then the second point, which was and pivoting and what happens during product development. So if you start from the very, very beginning doing DFM, then you have to kind of restart that process at points, because maybe some pivots happen, maybe some changes of design happen, maybe marketing figured out that some things weren't right about the product placement, some things need to change. And so you have to restart that process. But you also can't wait till the very end either, because it is a process. It takes time. And so there is still that cash burn element. There's still that element of time decay for a product getting to market that makes a difference. So I believe it's a balance. I don't think there's a right or wrong time to start DFM, but I do believe that it is it's an iterative process that happens at various stages of the NPI cycle.
Coming up to number 4, testing method does not cover the important things. So what are those important things? This is actually very similar to the first issue. It's about the contract manufacturer understanding the target market of the customer. There are product use cases and usage environments related to each project, and the understanding of this, the certifications, and just imagining how this product will be used or abused within that environment, I think is very important. What do you think a contract manufacturer can do in order to understanding the testing process better?
So the first thing is understanding that testing is a multi-level type of a topic, right? So there's the testing that happens during manufacturing. There's the testing that happens at various stages, whether you want to call it the QC processes, or you want to call it the overall testing methodologies for the product while it's in production. And that's one type of testing that CMs are generally very good at. But then when you take it the next step, where, as you said, there may be certain users that need, in order to sell legally to those users in certain countries, there's other types of testing that has to be done on a product in order for it to get electrical certifications, or to get RF certifications, or to get some type of a safety requirement. Those are the type of testing a lot of times CMs may be good with and may not be good with. But those are actually not really in the same category of testing. And so when you have one word where you just say testing, for many people, you have to be more clear. Like, what does it mean? What are we really talking about? And so the methods around that many times are very specialized for different elements. And some of the processes, for example, if you have a medical device, right, there's actually there's things that you have to do during the assembly, or there's specific requirements around the assembly facility that there has to be in order to make that certificate valid, and in order to actually say that your product went through that particular process. So, again, I think sometimes it's about the nuance. It's about what kind of testing does a product really need. The customer needs to be very good at communicating that to the CM, and the CM needs to in turn understand, how do I do that, and how long does it take, and what is it good for, and really help to set the stage, in many ways for why that testing is important.
Okay, next up. Lack of communication between internal and external stakeholders. So what we see a lot of the time with contract manufacturers is that once a project has been onboarded, the communication drops between the manufacturer and the customer. there is always lots of things that are left for guessing, and the customer hasn't explicitly things that the customer hasn't explicitly agreed upon, or the manufacturer has clearly understood. What do you think a CM and a customer should do in order to clear up these issues?
Well, I think the first thing is have a solid communication plan. What are the scenarios where a CM needs to get approval from a customer? What are the scenarios where it's very, very important for the CM to do communication? And then on the opposite side, the customers need to make sure that they are constantly communicating and understanding whether it's timelines, whether they're understanding QC rates, whatever those may be, right? The customer also has to be a little bit proactive about making the communication. But I think your point is well taken in that, really it's a common issue, right? Especially when your CM is in China, your CM is in Malaysia, your CM is in Japan, your CM is in Korea, wherever your CM may be. There's quite possible that the customer or the people that are ordering this product are in the US, in Europe, somewhere else is in a completely different time zone. So it's a lot of trouble, to stay up late at night. Who do I call? It's late for me. What time is it for them? And then if you email, sometimes the emails can fall into a void, right? So I think that having that communication plan in place is very, very important. But then also, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Part of the DFX process, right, is you're also creating procedures, you're creating processes where there will be breakpoints where a CM has to get input from a customer, right? If there's a certain QC checkpoint that fails, right, or there's a certain thing that keeps happening again and again and again, then you need to make sure that there's solid communication, between the CM and the customer. But then you also made one other point that I think is very, very important too, is don't ask a CM to be creative, right?
What could happen if the CM gets creative?
Well, they're going to make decisions that may not be in line with the vision or the values of the customer, right? They're going to say, okay, what's easiest for us to do, or what makes the most sense based upon the parameters that we have that we're working on. But again, it goes back to, if your CM is in a different country, a different culture, a different place than you are, then a lot of the decisions they make are going to be informed by their culture, their background, really how they would think. And so if you're going to ask them to be creative, the framework that they have to be creative and the framework that you as a customer would have to be creative are different. And so the chances of you getting an outcome that you're not pleased with is very high. That's why it's very, very important that communication channels be very strong, and that there be as little room as possible for creative interpretation or decision making.
Coming up to number 6, no focus on the supply chain. So this is, I think, a problem that we see mainly with North American and European contract manufacturers, is that they have great design ability, engineering resources, but when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to supply chain resources, they overextend and occasionally fail to volume up the production. So do you think the job of a contract manufacturer is to do R&D efforts such as design for manufacturing, design for assembly, or should it be, or is it very important for a contract manufacturer to leverage their supply chain capabilities as well?
So for us, part of our DFX service is we look at components. We look at the overall BOM of a product and say, what do we think is going to happen long term to that product's parts? Are they going to be available for 18 months, 24 months? Is there a high probability that there may need to be a component change in the future? So we do fairly deep supply chain research around our customers' products based upon their production plan. So there's actually kind of two elements to this, right? One element is a customer will tell us a production plan. They'll say, okay, over the next year, I expect to make 40,000 of these products, or they say, well, we're not so sure, but we think it's going to be between 20,000 and 40,000, right? They'll have an idea. And so based on that, we can understand from our suppliers and looking at the supply chain, are these various components going to be available? Now, that's one element of this. But what happens if there's a change? What happens if the customer comes back and says, "Oh, we got a big order. We need to increase our supply by 50%." And what do you do? And so that's actually where the scale value comes in when you're talking about in countries where in a bit they're kind of post-manufacturing economy, right? So when you talk about Europe and you talk about the U.S. They have very strong manufacturing capability, but it's normally not high scale, right? So as you said, their capabilities are for precision and for high quality is very good. But if you ask, factories there to make 50,000 or 100,000 of something on a short period of time, that's really not the way that they're designed in the year 2020. So that's where having a good contract manufacturer that understands scale and that understands the ability to be elastic is very, very important. And as you said, like some CMs are very good at that, some CMs are not. But really, it comes back to, again, that's a communication challenge. It's a communication issue where a customer has to tell a CM, "Hey, this is our expectation," and then the CM needs to come back and be very clear. Okay, great, we can either meet or not meet that. But they need to qualify it and say, but if you need more or you need less, right, then this is what's going to happen as a result of that. And so again, there's a lot of communication challenges that can happen, even if you're in the same country with your CM, let alone on the other side of the world.
We talked very often about the flexibility that the CMs should have, and now that we are living in these very odd times that restrict traveling, that restrict parts availability, that restrict many things, that create shocks in the supply chain, how do you think a contract manufacturer should respond to this?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this year, has been one for memory for a long time. Right, and there have been really multiple shocks to the system that have happened this year. Right, so you had economic shocks, you've had travel suspensions, you've had supply chain interruptions, you've got countries that are not happy with each other on trade. Right, there's a lot of things going on, and so it comes back to really how do we address these things in a way that allows for customers to get the products that they need when they need them. And so, as you said, flexibility is key. Now, the way we do this, right, is we have 500 suppliers all around the world, many of them doing very similar things that allow us to minimize shocks and the impact of shocks to our system. And so I would say that to anybody that's doing manufacturing, that's working with a CM, making sure that your CM has a geographically dispersed base, their ability to deliver, even if there's localized shocks. We have factories here in China, we have factories in Malaysia, we have suppliers in Europe, in the U.S., obviously here in Asia, and so we're able to a bit more structurally handle some shocks. Obviously, big shocks will cause issues for everyone, but we've kind of designed NexPCB to handle a lot of different shocks and a lot of different potential issues. And so, but I think it's very important for a CM to realize that their underlying supply chain and the ability that they have to handle localized, regionalized, and globalized shocks is very important, and they need to really think about how that affects not only their business, but how does it affect their customers' business too. And so, again, flexibility is key. We've talked about that a lot, and especially in the year 2020 and beyond, where flexibility is going to not only be key, it's going to be a strategic imperative.